Good morning, everyone, to this new episode of Sales Leadership and Sales Motivation with Simon and Wajid. Today, we are going to talk about another interesting topic, which perhaps is a critical one when it comes to sales process, sales growth, sales leadership, and what we do on daily basis. And it is what we will discuss on in this first 15 session of this podcast. The way we are envisioning it is that we will talk perhaps first half in the first episode, and then we will do the wrap up in the second episode next week. So stay tuned with us. I will bring on my co-partner and my co-host here in a second. Simon, he's here in the studio setting up for coming live here. I'm Wajid Ali from Toronto, Canada. I've been working in the sales and leadership for more than 18 years now, and the reason for bringing these podcasts is to share our knowledge and experience with the audience here and make your life better by sharing our experiences. So I'll bring up my co-host Simon for introduction, and then we will roll up the plan.
Thank you, Wajid, and good morning, everyone. Thanks again for joining this new session of the Sales Leadership Podcast with Wajid and Simon. We look forward to sharing our experiences, some of the best practices we have seen through our careers, obviously spanning over the last almost 2 decades now. I'll say I feel a little bit old now, talking about the almost 2 decades in the field. But we look forward to sharing our experiences. And today's going to be interesting. We're going to be talking about some of the common mistakes we see out there when it comes to sales, approaching sales process, and approaching new customers. So we look forward to diving into the topic. As Wajid mentioned, again, I'm Simon Rodriguez. I'm based in Calgary, Western Canada, and I've been in the sales industry over 18 years now. So we look forward to diving into some of the details. Now, I guess with that, we can frame the discussion, Wajid, to one of the things we were talking about, right? Like, what are those typical sales mistakes we see that most people make, right, when we either preparing for new prospects, approaching new customers, new opportunities. So can you share with us what are some of those common mistakes, at least you want to start with, that you're normally seeing out there and you have seen throughout your career?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Simon, for framing for the audience here. So as we all know, sales is a challenging profession, right? It's rewarding, but there are challenges associated with the sales. And, most of us, we become overwhelmed with our daily routine, day-to-day activities, and we kind of, perhaps, I guess, for lack of a better term, we forego some of the mistakes that most of us might be doing on a daily basis. And the first one that comes to my mind is not understanding the customer needs. Meaning that most of us understand, perhaps most of us thinks that, especially, I guess it may be more applicable to the tenured people in the sales industry, and most of tenured people, they would think like that, hey, I understand the customer needs, I understand the customer, I understand the industry, and they will not do any more research on understanding the exact pain points of the customer, they would avoid understanding the exact pain points of the customer. They will just go with their experience, and they will based up on what they have learned through their career. And what happens?
That's certainly a challenge,
right,
that I have seen as well in the process, right? Early in the sales process. I think you're back. I think it was cutting for a few seconds. Got you back, right?
Yeah. So what happens is that when we go through the sales process, the first thing is understanding the customer needs, right? And how do you understand that? How do you understand your customer, and how much do you understand your customer is, I guess, a key foundation for any sales success. If you avoid this first step, if you go into the sales process without understanding what your customer is looking for, what their pain points are, what is it that they want to achieve, what are the outcomes they expect, and what pains they're trying to solve. If you avoid all these things and you just go into the sales process, I feel like that's the first mistake to start with. So I'll take a pause here and I will leave it to you, Simon, to share your views as well.
Thank you, Wajid. And that's interesting because that reminds me as well, that brings me back to a short story here that I know resonate with you and with the audience. You and I think we were same organization, but back in the day, there was this notion of prescribing before diagnosing, right? So that's kind of that, going back to a mistake you're referring. We see some people jumping into prescribing mode, like thinking, okay, this is what you need, this is what the your organization needs, and you jump into that conclusion thinking this is what the customer needs without or skipping the diagnosis portion, right? So I know that many organizations, which I think is something I appreciate, they take that process, that approach of diagnosing first before going into a prescribing mode, right? And I think an analogy, the story was, I think you and I talked about it, is when you go to the doctor, right? Last thing you want is that you go get into a doctor and say, okay, well, this is what you need, okay, but you haven't even asking, ask the questions, listen to what are the symptoms or what is it that you're facing, right? So I think it's the same analogy, right? If you go with your slide deck and go into a new customer, okay, this is what we have, this is what you need, it wouldn't work. I think it goes back into diagnosing the situation, the customer, the organization, what are the drivers, what is it that they're trying to solve or trying to accomplish, and that starts by asking the right questions, understanding. And I think to your point, that will, like, framing the discussion in a way that you gather more insights from the customer, it will bring you to that understanding, right? And then obviously you will go into providing options, etc. But yeah, I think it's interesting, and I kind of see that analogy of prescribing before understanding the full diagnosis of a situation, right? So
Yeah, thanks, Simon, for bringing that analogy. And I guess I will add to it. Like if you go to a, just with your example, if you go to a doctor which right away prescribes you a solution or a prescription without understanding your problem or pain points, you may end up not going to that doctor again because it's not going to help, right? So it applies to salespeople as well. Like if you go to the customers without understanding their problems, without understanding what is it they want to solve, and you start prescribing your solutions or products at them, most likely they will close the doors at you, and there will be a huge wall of objection, and they wouldn't even want to meet you again because you have, I guess, you haven't had that credibility yet to talk to them. And it's a nice segue to the next point, which I think is kind of linked to the first point that we just discussed here, is the lack of preparation, right? So meaning that if you go to the meetings, you have a slide deck ready, but you don't know your customer yet, so you're not yet prepared to start pitching about your products or maybe the solution because you haven't done your research. So you go into the room without understanding your customer, without doing the right proper research, you start pitching your product or solution to the clients or to the customer. It's not going to help. So as a salespeople, we need to take pause, we need to take time, we need to put some energy, some extra efforts into our sales research process, customer research process, understand what they want to achieve, and then tailor our offering, our solution, if it is a right fit, right? You need to understand that not every time you're the right fit for your customer, and that's all right. And that I guess most of these things comes with experience. What do you think about this one, Simon?
yeah, I share your view there as well. One thing I wanna highlight is this one is connected. I think it's closely connected to the first one, is understanding the customer needs. And if you prepare well enough, that will help you understand basically those needs, right? And come prepare and kind of a craft a solution, right? Let's say the way I see this one is preparation also implies doing research about the organization that you're meeting, understanding, and it depends on the organization, but you might go into looking into their annual reports in terms of financial reports. Look, what are the metrics, what are the things that that company cares, and they wanna focus on. So it's that preparation, right? I think, which I think is connected to understanding the customer needs. I like this, I think, a quote from Benjamin Franklin that says, failing to prepare is preparing to fail, right? So if you go out there, as you said, with your slide deck, but no research, no idea about the company, yeah, you might have a prepared deck, but usually you're not prepared to help that customer. So in failing to prepare, actually you're preparing to fail to meet the needs of that customer. So it's so important to prepare beforehand. Obviously, you won't have all the answers, you won't have every single details about the customer, but getting in there with a view, a perception of what you think it's important to them. It's essential. So yeah, I think those two are connected, and I think with that is also I'll say a good connection into a third aspect we have here. We did the third aspect is being perhaps too lacking that follow up, right? Sometimes we say, okay, we prepare for the customer session, we build that initial trust, we gather some initial information, everything was positive, but then we just kind of, we forget about following up, and then the opportunity just dies, right? But what's your perspective, Wajid, and what's your experience about follow up, and why is that important? Why do we need to focus on following up after an initial engagement or discussion?
Yeah, I think it's as part of the sales process, following up on any with any customer. I guess it's the key. It's essential. Most of, I mean, based there are different surveys in the market that they're available online. But what happens is most of the salespeople, they just hardly do one or two touch points as a follow up, and then they give up, and that's why they lose potential sales, right? Typically, if you want to be successful in sales, especially with solution sales or sales that is a long turnaround, long lead sales. So what you need to do is you need to keep following up with your customers at least minimum 5 to 7, and sometimes depending on where you are in the sales journey, you may end up having 10 to 12 sales follow-up calls with the customer before you convince them, persuade them to make a decision. So before you reach to that point where they are at being convinced to make a decision, you need to have a cadence of sales follow-up. It could be through emails, it could be through phone calls, it could be through face-to-face meetings. You just need to be careful that you don't come across too pushy. I guess that's the next point in some of the typical sales mistakes that we wanted to highlight here. But you need to find a fine balance between when it come across too pushy and when it is genuine follow-up, right? And how can you find that that balance between not being too pushy, but at the same time you're genuinely following up? And again, it falls back to those sales foundation where you need to come across being transparent, being genuine, being authentic, and you need to come across as you are trying to help your customer. You're trying to help solve their problems. You don't need to come across being too salesy. Uh, I guess to understand all these points, perhaps the best way is to read books. Of course, there are a lot of sales books, but at the same time, you need to find a sales mentor within your organization or maybe outside your organization who can help you identify. Maybe you can practice with that person. You can practice with peers. There are different ways of doing it, Simon. It's a huge topic. I guess we can take hours and hours of what's the best strategy, and every time the strategy changes because the situation changes. Just in the interest of time, I will pause here. Maybe you can wrap it up for us and share your thoughts as well on these points.
Certainly, we did, and I think you covered the topic quite well, actually covering the third and the fourth typical mistakes we see, and exactly to your point is not following up, and the importance of following up is a key thing, right? And I think to connecting to what you were mentioning about not being pushy and adding value, in my view, that's the key thing, right? Like in my experience, as long as you're not following up for the sake of following up, but you're following up to add value, to perhaps share some particular content, research, like adding value to that customer. So I see the follow-up as an opportunity bring, right, to circle back with that customer, to bring up something value, and continue that obviously that journey with the customer. As you said, sometimes it might take multiple touch points to get into converting an opportunity, and that's why it's so important. And it's a thin boundary between following up with value versus being too pushy, which I think is the mistake we were highlighting. But in general, I think those are four things we were seeing continuously that I think if we avoid these typical mistakes, we'll be better off in the sales journey. Just to summarize is: number one, not understanding customer needs. Number two is a lack of preparation. Third one is basically not following up, right? Failing to follow up. And last but not least, being too pushy, to your point with it. So I think with that, we'll close it out here and continue in the next session. Any final thoughts on your end, Wajid, before we wrap it up?
No, thank you, Simon, for summarizing it for the audience. I will just say, whoever is listening, we truly appreciate your feedback, your comments, and the insights. If you have come across any similar mistakes, or if anything that you would like to add into the list of mistakes that typically salespeople do on during their sales journey, feel free to leave it in the comment section below. We truly appreciate it. We'll see you guys in the next episode next week. Thank you again, and have a nice weekend.
Thanks, everyone.